Sparking Change with Gigi, a show that aims to make the world a better place by bringing together authentic minds. This show encourages each of us to be the change we wish to see in the world. Get ready to be inspired and join us on this journey to create a brighter future for all.
Welcome everyone to Sparking Change with Gigi. I'm your host, Giovanna Tartarone, and today I am honored to welcome Dr. Richard Lucente, a human biologist, clinical coordinator, and a lead health coach with over 30 years of experience in medicine, nutrition, and functional health. A top graduate of St. John's University and former chief resident at NYU Lagoon, Dr. Lucente has been recognized as one of America's top family physicians and is a pioneer in functional and nutritional-based medicine. His groundbreaking work includes developing one of New Jersey's largest biomedical autism treatment programs, advancing hormonal optimization, and co-founding Inner You Health and Wellness, where his mission is to put the care back in healthcare. I love that. Dr. Lucente brings a wealth of knowledge in gut health, disease prevention, and holistic healing. And today he's here to share powerful insights on the connection between autism and the gut-brain relationship. Welcome, Dr. Rich.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Giovanna.
Thank you.
To see you again.
Likewise. And, and we all hear that the gut is the second brain. And so, we definitely are here to learn more.
Okay, great. So, I was lucky enough when I relocated from New York to New Jersey. I had a practice in Staten Island, New York, and Brooklyn, New York, and I was looking just for some part-time work in New Jersey, and I came upon a place called Family Wellness Center, and this wonderful doctor who became my mentor, Dr. David Dornfeld, had a regular family practice office, but he also had a functional medicine practice, and I saw that my patients were just getting medications and all of his patients were actually getting better. And so I started really becoming interested in functional medicine. And he had a very big autism practice there. And I was always trained that autism was not reversible and it was permanent and it didn't require, any treatments. So, I became fascinated in autism. One of the things was gut testing, right? So we did microbiome testing, and this is back in 2006, before it was really even talked about the microbiome. And we started to see patterns, like in the microbiome. We saw lots of inflammation. We saw a lot of what we call gut dysbiosis, which is a disproportion of good and bad bacteria, and really serious gut issues. And we noticed that when we treated the gut health with things like anti-inflammatory treatments, hyperbaric oxygen, probiotics, we noticed that the behaviors started to change. So, and the reason for that is that your gut is intimately connected with your brain, right? Through something called the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is a nerve that goes from your gut to your brain. And so you always used to hear these little colloquialisms like butterflies in your stomach when you got nervous, right? And things like that, where people notice that their anxiety would trigger gut issues, right? So one of the things that really fascinated me, what I found out was that for every one nerve that was sending signals from the brain to the gut, there were 8 fibers sending messages from the gut to the brain. So there's much more activity for the gut sending messages to the brain than the brain sending messages to the gut. So in recent years, we've also learned that about 70% of your neurotransmitters in the brain, like serotonin, which gets converted to melatonin, and norepinephrine and GABA and dopamine, a lot of the production of those things actually happen in the gut. So when these little microbes eat the food, the nutritious food, in particular, they actually produce these what we call postbiotics now that happen to be these neurotransmitters that feed our brain. And there's also a pathway for inflammation as well that travels to the brain. So that's where my focus has been kind of for the last 10 years in noticing that overall health comes from fixing the gut first, and then everything else kind of falls into place.
Wow. So the diet definitely plays a big role in supporting the gut and brain connection.
Oh,
Meaning,
absolutely. So
so
we
yeah,
noticed that with gluten-free, in the very beginning, people would go gluten-free, casein-free, and in most kids we would see improvements. Now
yes,
we know it's kind of much more involved than that. But so here's how I explain it to the children and their families, right? So you have
yeah,
these good gut buddies, which are your friends, and your
yeah,
bad gut buddies, right? And your good gut buddies like to eat things with fiber, right? Like
hmm,
so vegetables and things like sweet potato and lean proteins. And your bad gut buddies, they love sugar and French fries and artificial flavors and so what happens though is your good gut buddies, when they're fed well, it makes your body feel good. And when your bad
right.
gut buddies are fed, it makes your body feel kind of icky, right? So that's how I explain it to the children. But it
Mhm.
really is true. So your microbiome changes based on your diet more than anything else. So when you're eating good, healthy foods, your microbiome will actually start to change, and you'll start to grow more of the good bacteria, and the bad bacteria will get starved out. So you can fix your microbiome a lot just by changing the diet.
And I bet you it probably has some kind of connection to the behavior as well, right? Because I know in general, sugar makes you jumpy and,
Right.
so it's got to have some connection to the behavior of the child if they have bad gut issues,
No,
correct?
absolutely. And yeah, so just like we talked about where when the serotonin production, right, from the good bacteria, when you eat sugar and processed foods and high fructose corn syrup and seed oils, these bad bacteria flourish and they produce these inflammatory compounds, which can go into the bloodstream if you have something called leaky gut, and into the brain and cause inflammation in the brain and all these inflammatory chemicals that get there. So absolutely that's your diet and the level of what you eat has a profound effect. And even very more interestingly enough is that these bad bacteria will actually send signals to your brain for you to crave more of these foods, especially yeast. So if we see kids or even adults that have like this crazy sweet tooth and they're always craving sugar, many times we find that they have yeast in their gut. And through studies, they found that the yeast is actually sending signals to the parts of the brain that make you crave sugar. So the yeast is controlling your brain to tell you, get me some sugar because that's what I need to survive. So, it's very much more sophisticated. These aren't just like single organism bacteria that they're actually manipulating our brains to feed them what they want to eat. That's where the challenge comes. I'm sure, Giovanna, that you saw
Yeah.
that how most kids with autism, what's the first thing? They're picky eaters. All they'll eat is chicken nuggets and fries. Well, that's because that's what their microbiome is trained to eat. So they have
Yeah.
all this bad bacteria that's made. So it's a painstaking process, but you have to start to make small changes in the diet and start adding foods that are going to help enrich the microbiome. But you're
Yes.
not going to take a kid who's only eating chicken nuggets and fries and give him a plate of grilled chicken and broccoli and expect him to eat it. It has to be
Right, right.
small changes, probiotics that help to change the microbiome. But the diet is probably the number one thing that affects behavior, even ADHD as well as autism.
Right. And I do recall, you're right, that I had this one child, he would for lunch every day starting in September, but we had a plan like by December he was going to be off the Oreo cookies. It used to
You're
be
right.
Oreo cookies constantly for lunch. And so little by little we, made him taste like French fries, something
Right.
different than Oreo cookies because that's all he
Right.
wanted. So I do agree that they become fixated on something, and the parents
Right.
think that's all he's going to eat. So let me just give him Oreos.
Well,
But
kids will never starve themselves. So that's the first thing is, so like if they're hungry, eventually they will eat. Maybe they'll lose a couple of pounds, but in general, you have to try to, so like, let's say very typical, a kid that's only eating chicken nuggets, right?
right,
Let's start with getting a better brand of chicken nuggets, something that doesn't have genetically modified contents, or something that has very simple ingredients and that has, you know, doesn't have processed chicken, or, you know, or make your own with better healthy ingredients. You know, that's another thing. So, okay, you're going to have the chicken nuggets, but this is the one that your good gut buddies like better, right? So this can make you
right,
feel better, do better in school, things like that. So, you know, it's a long process, but once you start to change the diet, the microbiome kind of changes along with it. And as the microbiome changes, they'll have less cravings for unhealthy things and more cravings for healthy things. You
have
know,
you
so
noticed?
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was going to say, have you noticed the length of time that it would take a child to change a habit, especially in foods? Like, is it 2 months, three
Yeah, it's
months?
3 months, typically 90 days to change a habit,
Okay.
you know.
Okay.
But you could make it, you could make, you know, just small changes, you know, smoothies. A lot of times kids will drink smoothies. So sneaking the supplements into there that are going to promote good gut health, and things like spirulina and, you know, B vitamins and magnesium and methylated vitamins. All of these things that you can kind of sneak into a smoothie is one of the helpful
Yeah.
things, you know, but then you could put things that they like in there, like bananas or whatever it is, you know, to kind of make
Right.
it better. But it's just like adults, though. Eating good whole foods is the key to health. You know, it's
Absolutely. You mentioned probiotics, and I love to know what role does probiotics and microbiome, like how did they balance out in kids with autism? Because I know there's a connection there as well, right?
right. So there, yeah. So actually, there's some really interesting studies going on now by some doctors in California, and what they noticed is that children with autism are lacking a specific species of gut bacteria called bifidobacter. And that seems to be something that's depleting in the US population in general because of all of the bad foods that we eat. But when they started replacing bifidobacterium, and interestingly, in their studies, ivermectin, which you know of its
Yes.
effectiveness with COVID and the controversy, but ivermectin is actually generated from bacteria, and it actually does increase bifidobacterium in the gut. And they were noticing that kids, when they put them, now this is a study, again, this is not something that we're doing, but they noticed that when they put kids on ivermectin, that the autism was improving. And there are some clinical trials going on, but it seems that probiotics in certain species definitely play a major role in autism. And we know that most kids with autism have messed up guts. They have dysbiosis. And the other thing that they're doing in these studies is something called a fecal transplants, where they're taking the microbiome from healthy patients, and they're using a colonoscope to place it into the large intestine, and they're actually replacing their microbiome with a healthy microbiome, and that's also making tremendous improvement in kids with autism. So it's important, though, that you can't just pull. So we do stool testing on our patients, so we know exactly what. So when you pull a probiotic off the shelf, first of all, every probiotic is different. It has different species, different amounts, and there's trillions of different bacteria. In fact, they're discovering new bacteria in our gut almost every month. There's a new bacteria. So we don't know. We know very little about the microbiome. That being said, probiotics can help, but you have to take the probiotics that your particular body needs. And also, secondly, you need to make sure that that probiotic has the food that it needs to grow. So kind of, it's like if you took a garden and you had crappy soil and you planted some flowers and then you took the same flowers from the same seed pack and you put it in a garden that had lots of fertilizer and nutrients in the soil, you're going to see a big difference. That's the way probiotics work too. So most of the time you need to give a prebiotic, which is usually something like glutamine or inulin or things, hot fiber that will create the environment for the probiotic. So just grabbing a probiotic off the shelf and taking it a lot of times doesn't work because you're not creating that good environment for the bacteria to grow.
Right. I think, and I used to do this. The higher the number, the better the probiotic, right? And that's definitely not the case at all.
Exactly.
In fact, it can hurt you if you don't know what your body
if you have
handle.
too much of even a good bacteria, so your body's going to be out of balance. So here's the other analogy I use, and it's really very, very true. Your gut is a neighborhood, right? And you have all of these bacteria, viruses, parasites, yeast, all living in this neighborhood, right? And there's a perfect balance. So if your neighborhood has police, fire department, post office, all of these things. So every bacteria has its own role in the gut. Right. And there needs to be this perfect balance. So for example, if you have too little police, what happens? Crime goes up, right? So if you have too little of a bacteria that's kind of monitoring the gut, you're going to get overgrowth of bad bacteria. But that being said, if you have too many police, what happens? It blows your budget, right? Now you have all these police and we're paying all these police. So it's actually bad for the town now, right? Because we have too many police and now we have no crime and we have all these policemen that we're paying their salaries, right? And it's affecting our budget. So it's the same thing in the gut. There needs to be a balance of good bacteria, bad bacteria, good yeast, viruses. They all are living together harmoniously for the most part. And when you disrupt that balance is when you have gut issues.
And so let's go back to food for a second, because that's where some of the problems lie, right? So are there specific foods or toxins parents should watch out for that can worsen the symptom of a leaky gut, like you mentioned?
Right. That's a great question. Probably one of the most common questions that parents will ask too. So refined sugars, right? So when you see high fructose corn syrup, that's a huge one. It's just terrible for your gut. Seed oils, right? Anything that has hydrogenated seed oils like corn oil and canola oil, those are all highly processed oils that are very inflammatory. Processed foods in general, things that have preservatives in them, are terrible for your gut. They're feeding the bad bacteria. But sugar, and of all the things, sugar is what the bad bacteria like to eat the most. Now, there's different types of sugar too, though. If you're getting sugar from organic, locally local honey or local maple syrup or something, that's it's not a processed sugar. So, and then there's sugar substitutes. Like I love monk fruit, which comes from a plant. So monk fruit is a natural plant that tastes sweet, but it doesn't raise your blood sugar. So you can make lots of good substitutions, but you have to, as a parent, especially if you have a child with autism, you have to start reading labels and read them all, because the first few ingredients may be things that seem healthy, right? Like, fruit extract or whatever it is. But when you start
peanut butter.
Yeah, you see high fructose corn syrup and you see canola oil and sunflower oil and all. That's when, what's the ingredients in avocado, right? There's no label on an avocado because there's only one ingredient, right? So if something comes in a box, most of the time it's not very good for you. And parents should learn how to make healthy alternatives. And there's lots of good cookbooks out there. Like there's a cookbook by Dr. Gundry, Stephen Gundry, who's done a lot of research on gut health. The Plant Paradox Family Cookbook, where it has healthy substitutions for family favorites like mac and cheese and meatloaf and things that kids like to eat, but substituting healthy ingredients. So that's a really good way to try to get your children, is to start cooking at home, getting them involved in the cooking. But,
right.
But to answer your question, high fructose corn syrup is number one. Seed oils is number two. And then food dyes and preservatives are probably number 3.
And breads and toast and all,
Right.
all
Well,
stuff.
bread, if you're getting an organic, freshly made sourdough bread or Italian bread that the only ingredients are yeast, flour, and water, and again, what happens? We can talk as Italians, right?
Yeah.
What happens when you buy a loaf of Italian bread? The next day, it's already stale, right? And they're using it for bread.
It's gone.
Right.
It's in our belly already.
Go buy a packaged bread,
Yeah.
and it'll stay soft and fresh
Right.
for a month, right? That's because of the chemicals they're putting in it.
That's
Bread gets stale very quickly if it's so. Not all bread is created equal, So if you want to splurge on bread, get some fresh baked bread that has no preservatives or healthy ingredients in it. So
you just mentioned a key word, which is chemicals, and
yes.
it's I know we're talking about food, but there's chemicals in other things that children are being exposed to. For example, maybe soaps or detergents or things like that I believe also have chemicals that can affect because our skin is porous. I have a
That's a great
esthetician
point.
license, right? So, I remember, like, you can put oil on your hands and it's going to penetrate through your skin. And so it's important to also understand there's a relationship between like fake oils or fragrances that can we talk a little bit about that? Because I know it's so easy to go pick up, Downy and things like that, but I really think that does affect us even though we're not digesting it.
So I think that's a really, really important point. That I think that's really insightful. So just think about this, right? Think about something as simple as laundry detergent, right? So you're washing your clothes in something that we know if we ingested it, right? When kids were doing this Tide Pod challenge, and there's warnings that this is poison, right? We're washing our clothes that are now sitting on our skin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, our skin is porous and absorbing that. We wash our dishes with dishwashing liquid that's also toxic if you eat it. Yet we're eating off plates that were washed in that. We're drinking out of glasses that were washed in those things. Fragrances, in laundry detergent, fragrances and everything like Downy to make fabric softener. But these are all chemicals. Now, the interesting thing is that what I learned this back in 2006 at the Defeat Autism Now conference. So many kids, probably up to about 60 or 70% of kids with autism and ADHD have what we call methylation issues. They have a gene, a lot of them have a gene abnormality called MTHFR. So what this gene essentially is, it's a gene that doesn't allow our cells to detoxify properly. So now we have children with a genetic predisposition to poor detoxification, living in a world where almost everything that we touch is toxic. And that's why autism is a spectrum, because it depends on what you've been exposed to, what these children's brains have been exposed to, and at what stage in development. So if some child has been exposed to some really toxic chemicals at a very early time in development, they may become profoundly autistic, where they're not speaking or they have very severe behavioral issues. Whereas maybe a kid with Asperger's who's very highly functioning was maybe exposed to something a little bit later in the brain development, but maybe also something that was toxic to the brain. So, so you have this genetic predisposition to not be able to detoxify. And like you mentioned, we're loaded with toxins. Just think about not only detergents, but things like heavy metals, right? You cook in non-stick cookware, which is, you're heating up aluminum into your food. Or if you wrap your food in aluminum or cooking in an aluminum pan or an aluminum foil, that aluminum is getting into your food. And heavy metals are highly linked to brain dysfunction. I can tell you that when we used to chelate kids, which is a process of removing metals from the body, sometimes orally or through an IV, kids, when we remove the metals from their body, they had profound increases in language. Their language just exploded. I remember one particular child that we chelated him, and I hadn't seen him in months. The kid was nonverbal, and I'll never forget this day as long as I live. He walked in and his mother smiled at me and she said, "Do you have something to say to the doctor?" And he said, "Hi, Dr. Lucente." And I just cried. I was like, like this kid was completely nonverbal, banging his head against the. So we know that all of these chemicals and metals have an impact. And we also know that autism there's a genetic predisposition. So you have to be careful. Try to use fragrance-free products, use natural detergents, stay away from fragrances and colognes and all of these things. You're not going to be able to avoid it all, right? But what you can do is try to avoid it as much as possible. So think of your toxicity in your body as a cup, right? And as your toxin levels go up, your cup starts to fill up. But we have pathways for detoxification. So for your liver detox, you make a hole in the bottom of the cup. For your kidneys, you make a hole in the bottom of the cup. With your skin, we make a hole. With your cellular detoxification, the glutathione. So when we have good detoxification pathways, that cup, doesn't overfill unless we have a super amount of toxins. But if those holes at the bottom, like we have poor gut health, poor liver health, you're not doing sauna and not doing these detoxification methods, that cup fills up very quickly and you become toxic. So that's what's happening, So our job as functional doctors is to open up these pathways. And one of the best ways is through gut detoxification, right? A healthy liver and GI system that helps detoxify your body.
Right. And it's also being proactive, right? To do things that will not create the inflammation. And these are the things that we just mentioned. I know the other day I came across something that, and I used to do this, I used to buy the rice that has the plastic that you put in the hot boiling water, right? Because it used to be 1, 2, 3 really quick.
I've done that in medical school.
And now I realized I was eating plastic with my rice, and you look at you see that and you're like, oh my goodness, like, if I knew, I wouldn't have done that, obviously, right? So the whole point of even this show is to bring awareness to things that we do that sometimes we don't even recognize that they're unhealthy for us.
Like the Costco rotisserie chicken. So what do is first of all, the ingredients in the chicken and the way they, the hormones and stuff. But probably the worst part about buying a Costco rotisserie chicken is they take this hot chicken and they put it in this soft plastic wrapper and stick it on the shelf. So now the chicken is loaded with plastics, microplastics, which we know that they exist because we test for them. We do toxin burden testing on our patients, and we know that that kids have, and adults have these high levels of these microplastics. And that's where it comes from. Or if you heat your food up in a plastic container, from night before, you went to the Chinese restaurant or the Italian restaurant, and they gave you this soft plastic container, and now the next day you're heating that up in the microwave, you're loading yourself up with plastics. So, it's a huge issue. So you just, as a parent, have to start being more aware of what's going into your child's body, and think of that cup analogy. Like, am I filling up this cup too rapidly for the amount of holes that this cup has in the bottom? And you have to start thinking about those things. Like I said, you're not going to eliminate all the toxins in our environment. It's impossible, but you have to try to minimize them as much as you possibly can.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned testing. So what kind of testing or assessments, can help a parents, understand their child if they're having a gut issue, maybe to connect with you or a doctor to say, okay, I think there is an issue here. Like, what would they be seeing or noticing?
So again, I've been doing this, working with kids on the spectrum for a long time, since 2006. And almost every single one of them does have gut issues. Even if they don't have gut symptoms, they have gut issues. So the first thing we recommend is what's called a comprehensive digestive and stool analysis. So it's a microbiome test. So these tests are a stool test you do from home. Child poops in a little container. You take a sample of it, you send it off to the lab. And then they use PCR and culturing methods to grow out all of the good bacteria, any bad bacteria, bad yeast, tells us if you markers for leaky gut. Are these children digesting their food? What does their gut immunity look like? So these tests are very, very specific and sensitive, and they give us all the information that we need as practitioners to not have to guess, like just grabbing a probiotic off the shelf, like,
Right.
okay, but this is what you're lacking. So the first thing we recommend is a gut test, because like I said, just from experience, most kids, even if they don't have gut symptoms, they may have leaky gut or dysbiotic flora, which is bad bacteria. And so we start with that. Other tests that we do down the road, one is called an organic acid test, and that tests for the different bacteria metabolites, about over 200 processes in our body. That looks at like how we break down our foods. It looks at mitochondrial function, neurotransmitter function, somewhat gives you a clue into gut health, like do you have yeast or bad bacteria in your gut. So that's good for kids who are experiencing like sleep issues or low energy, or losing weight. Kids we feel they have metabolic or mitochondrial dysfunction. And then also, we do tests for toxins. Like the biggest one we see for children with autism is heavy metal toxins. So that's also a nice, and the metabolic test or organic acid test is simple. It's a urine test done from home. Same thing with the toxin test. It's a urine test. We can test for plastic. We can test for mold, mycotoxins, environmental toxins, but most important, heavy metals. Heavy metals are highly linked to autism. Aluminum, mercury, which are still, aluminum is still in some vaccines. Mercury used to be in the vaccines, not anymore. But just like I said, aluminum foil, nonstick cookware. So we do, the best way to test for heavy metals is by doing a provocative test, which means we'll give the child an oral, what we call chelating agent, something like calcium EDTA or DMSA. These are just agents that have a high affinity for metals, so they'll take a dose of that the night before the test. And what that does is it starts to pull metals out of the body into the urine, because metals are usually bound to our tissue, so they're hard to catch in the urine. But by doing a provocative test, we can kind of get a better idea of what the child's heavy metal burden is. And we've seen dramatic improvements when we start to remove metals from children's bodies. So those are kind of the top three. And then, we do food allergy testing and genetic testing, looking for that MTHFR gene. We understand that a lot of this testing also, though, is unfortunately not covered by insurance companies because they look at it as alternative. So a lot of times we use our clinical judgment to try to diagnose and minimize the cost for the parents. But gut testing, I think, is just essential for almost every child with autism and ADHD. So that's always the first step, is to get a good grasp of their gut health.
I remember, again, just being in the field, using an iPad, right? Using the phone, being stuck to the phone. EMF.
Right.
Does that have a connection to the wellness? I mean, I know for us it does.
It causes inflammation, right? So one of the main issue with autism is neuroinflammation, right? So we know, there's been plenty of studies showing that when you do scans of the brain, kids with autism, like a lot of the areas will light up, like for lots of inflammation. So it's not only chemicals in our environment. It's like, right, you have this kid that's stuck to the phone 24/7 with all this, so they do sell. One trick is they do sell EMF blockers that you could put kind of on the back of the phone. But also it's the blue light, right? So blue light keeps the brain awake. So if your child is not sleeping at night, make sure that they're not using that iPad or their phone or a TV or any device that emits blue light, within a couple hours of bedtime, and get them to do other activities, like maybe listening to some music or something more that's going to tell their brains to shut down. That's very important. But EMF is a huge issue. Yeah, I mean, just sleeping next to your phone and, with it plugged in but how many kids do you see, autistic or not autistic, just glued to their iPad, because it's become kind of like a babysitter for people. Like, right, you're trying to eat dinner with the family and kids being disruptive. All right, here's your iPad, and they're stuck to it. And so not only is the blue light disrupting their brain their brain wickedness, but also, like you mentioned, all of this EMF that they're constantly being exposed to, causing inflammation in their body.
And that, of course, translates to behaviors, right? That they become restless, or they don't want to, their behavior gets to be where, it's unmanageable, because they want that satisfaction from, whatever habit it is that they're doing with the iPad. Or as soon as you disrupt that behavior, then you're going through a transition period, right? And that's one of the things that I found it being very hard for parents, is to transition. And I know you said take baby steps, right? Because I know I spoke to many moms like, I can't do that. Like, it's like, I don't want to see him cry. I don't want to see her get upset. But that's a temporary thing. And the effects of changing, making a transition for the better, that's the focus we have to look at, versus that temporary, letting the child be upset a little bit, because the gains are astronomical.
Yeah. Again, so ultimately you have to start thinking that, what's the real harm here, right? Is the harm is that the kid gets upset and then gets, a few minutes later he's okay, or look at all the damage you're doing. So the other thing that I would say is, like, don't use the iPad as a reward, right? You don't want to make, if you're good, I'm going to give you your iPad, because then it becomes like the iPad becomes like something that's more sought after. So instead, start to make rules with your children, even if if they can understand. Start to make rules that these are the times you're allowed to use your iPad, right? And make it sure that it's not first thing in the morning, because you don't want them awakening to that type of EMF and light, and then not close to bedtime, and then just using it. Okay, this is the time of the day that you're going to get you. Kids do really well with routines, right? Yeah. So if you just wing it, especially kids with autism. Yes. So the first thing I tell parents to do is to make a schedule for your child, right? So these are the times you're going to use your iPad, right? Unless you misbehave, then you're going to miss out on that time, and that time is going to be spent doing something else. But everything should be clearly written out for them on a whiteboard or something like these, especially on the weekends, right? A lot of kids decompress. They decompress on the weekends, right? Because they're structured at school, and then, or a lot of kids are really, they're well behaved in school, and they come home and they're maniacs, right? The parents are going like, what's the difference? The difference is the structure, right? So kids need structure. All kids need structure. So making routines for your children and setting out specific times to do these things, like not just giving the iPad because they're disrupted, and say, okay, what are you supposed to be doing now? This, from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, you're supposed to be doing, reading activities, or, something.
Puzzles or something, right? Yes.
Yeah. So, and it depends on the level of the child, but you can kind of figure it out. And there's lots of useful information on the internet for that. But I think that's tremendously important, is that, limiting the times. And again, kids do really, really well with structure, making a family rule book, these are the consequences, and giving children choices, right? But you make the choices. All three choices are yours, really, but they can pick. Okay, I'll give you a great example. All right, so I use this on my children. All right, so now it's bedtime. So I'm gonna make you choose. You're gonna brush your teeth first, or you're gonna wash up, or you're gonna get in your pajamas. Which one do you want to do first? Right? I picked all three choices, right? But they have the empowerment of choosing. Oh, I'm gonna get in my pajamas first, and then they'll, all
Right.
right, I'm the boss. I made the decision, but you
Yes.
gave them the choices, right? So it's things
Yeah.
like that that could make your life so much easier, right? If you just get into that structure
For all
of,
fairness, that's good for all kids,
right, all
right?
kids,
Because
yes.
I mean, I was born in Italy, so it was like, go to bed, right?
Yeah,
There's no
yeah,
choice, go to bed. And you're like, okay,
right.
but, as teachers and educators, we do give choices when it comes to activities or anything like that. And if they have, it's, again, they're taking the ownership and they're not
Yes.
saying, oh, I'm told what to do. They're like, oh, I chose what I wanted to do. So they feel, like you said, empowered. But I think it's across the board to all kids.
Right.
It's a
Yeah. No. And I
beautiful
tell
thing.
people, and I learned this from a family dynamics coach that really helped us
Mhm.
tremendously. Uh, so basically, we made a family rule book, and everybody was involved, including the children, in making the rules. So
Mhm.
we tell the parents now is make a family rule book. Okay, so if you misbehave, like if you are not following the rules and you do this, these are the consequences. And when everybody's got to agree, and even if the kid can't sign, he could just put a check mark next to it,
Yeah.
whatever. So now when your child breaks the rule, and you have to do it well, if you're the parent and you break the rule, you have to have the consequence, right?
Right.
But when you show the child, hey, this, you agreed to this consequence and you broke, you'd be surprised that you get so much less resistance. So
Right.
like you said, it's important for all kids, but kids with autism really need a
Especially.
structured environment. And
Absolutely.
that's why they decompensate, on the weekends, because they lose the structure of what to do with themselves, because their
Right.
brains are not able to focus and organize like in a systematic way, oftentimes, like what they should be doing. So you kind of have to hold their hand and say, okay, this is the next hour is the time you're going to be doing this. And you'll see
Yeah.
how much difference it makes. And then, the diet is huge. When you change their diet and combine it with the behavioral activities, you see improvements. There's no one therapy that works. It's
Yes.
incorporating all these things, ABA and tactile things and speech
Correct.
therapy, but you have to put the diet into place, and you have to create rules, and you have to eliminate toxins. All of these things are important.
Absolutely. And one thing I will share on a personal level, my son at 8 years old developed petit mal's, right? So it's a form of epilepsy.
Right.
So I was on this journey, like, what is this? Like, oh my goodness. And I did all my homework and all my research. But as a parent, who is going through this experience, it's like whatever we can do to make the child happy, like whatever I can give him, I'm going to go
Right.
buy. I mean, if every Apple thing that came out, he was the first one that got it. Like I waited
Right.
online to get it for him because I wanted to compensate,
Mhm.
for him not, for him having this condition. I wanted to kind of like be more powerful than the condition, right? And try
Right.
to make him forget it. From personal experience, I will say it was the worst thing I ever did.
Mhm.
If I had to go back and redo, I would never give in, because that's what I did. I kind of like
Right.
gave
Yeah.
in, gave my power away, let's say.
It comes from love, right? It's coming from love, but you have to sometimes, say, okay, what's truly best for
Right,
them, like,
right,
right? So sometimes it's tough love, right? Sometimes it's this, but again, having rules set like anywhere else, right? If you go to
right,
work and there's no employee manual and kind of everybody's just doing what they want, that office is usually in disarray and that business is usually
right,
failing. But when you go into a good company and there's a rule book and there's core values posted on the wall, like when I see these really well-run companies, they all have their core values posted on the wall. But what does that do? That creates structure. It's the same for children. They need
yes,
to know, you could even do that. We've had parents do that. These are our values of our family, right? We respect one another. We don't talk badly from one another. We don't yell at one another. Those types of things, especially with children on the spectrum, because they need that, right? Their brains are inflamed. They're in disarray. We need to help them with that process because it kind of retrains the brain
right.
to kind of be more organized, right?
Yes, absolutely. Can you share, I know you mentioned one story. Can you share another story of a patient who showed, great, remarkable results after doing these testing and kind of changing the diet and with the gut
Yeah,
issues?
I mean, yeah. So this is probably about 4 or 5 years ago, but I remember this one was also pretty profound where, um, this child would not eat anything except for Chef Boyardee ravioli, right? So now imagine what's happening to this child nutritionally, right? There's almost no protein. There's just processed carbs and sugar and
Hmm.
all these fake ingredients. And the kid was just out of control to the where the parent was like beside themselves, like they couldn't function themselves. So we did a gut test on them and we found that they were loaded with like a lot of bad bacteria. And it took some time to try to get the child. So what we did is we started sprinkling some of the supplements on the Chef
Okay.
Boyardee ravioli to try to change the microbiome a little bit. And then we started introducing new foods, but we knew exactly kind of what bacteria we had to target. So eventually it took us some time to get there, but we were eventually able to get them to take smoothies with things like with natural antibiotics to kill and within took about 3 or 4 months, but this child was now able to go back into the regular classroom where they were pulled out for behavioral issues. The speech was getting better, sleep was getting better. And that's a lot of it too, is a lot of these children are not sleeping. And you know
Right.
what happens. Look, what happens, Giovanna, when you don't sleep well for 3 or 4 nights? You probably get pretty cranky and irritable, right?
Correct.
So think about
Yeah.
a kid who's not getting enough sleep. So that was pretty profound, but that was one of the challenging ones because this kid ate nothing. But others are kids with ADHD. That I had one girl, a friend of mine's daughter, that was pretty much failing out of high school, and he said, "I've seen your talks on ADHD. I know my daughter has ADHD." So we did a genetic test, and she had this MTHFR gene, for which we started methylated vitamins that are basically it's kind of a workaround for the gene, right? So you're not able to methylate the vitamin, which is activate it basically. So we
Right.
gave the vitamin that had the active form of the vitamin in it. And then we gave just some fish oil and something called SAMe, which is another nutrient that donates methyl groups. And within 6 months, this young lady went from being almost out of high school to being an A student. She was coming home, doing her homework, very, very intelligent, but she just could never concentrate on anything. And he said to me, he says, this girl walked in after 2 weeks of the treatment, walked into my house, and I was, who is this girl? Like, who is that? She was coming up home from school, sitting down, doing her homework, concentrating. And then by dinner time, everything was done. It wasn't like pulling your hair out to try to get her to do because her brain was now getting all of the nutrients that it needed, and then of course eliminating food dyes and things like that. But sometimes it's simple changes and to make profound changes in children's lives. So this young lady went from, being chastised and being looked at as a bad
Yeah.
student to now just enhancing her brain function and correcting these little things that were wrong, making a profound difference. So that's why I do what I do, honestly. When you can make a difference in somebody's life like that, it's just, you can't even describe the euphoria that you get from it, right? It becomes
Absolutely.
so, and we see just kids all the time that, ADHD, behavioral issues, and then we treat their gut and all of a sudden, the behavior is better and they're doing better in school and the parents are a lot less stressed out. I mean,
Yeah.
hundreds of cases over the years. Yeah.
And it's, I recall back, now that I think about it, when a lot of parents, when they discover that, there could be a diagnosis, right? The first thing, I used to hear out of them, I was like, I am not putting my child on medication.
Right.
I'm not putting my child on medication. It doesn't, I hear too many bad stories. And so, I always say, don't cross out all options, right?
Right.
Right, because medication is not the only option. And
Right.
that's what now, if I come across parents who ask me, I say, take a look at alternative ways,
Yeah.
because in a world of infinite possibilities, there's always there's a will, there's a way. I mean,
Right.
that's my motto, right? There's a will, there's a way. We don't have to just think that there's accept what we don't like or what we don't see,
Right.
what we see. I'm sorry.
And we also do, we consult with new new expectant parents or
Yeah.
parents who have very, very young children, and we coach them through this, like, because we believe that that autism is there's no one cause of autism, right? There is no one
Right.
cause, but it's an environment. Genetic diseases do not increase in number like this. There's environmental factors. Do vaccines play some role? Maybe, maybe not. I don't think that it's the answer. I think that the things that are in the vaccine are very harmful. When you combine vaccines and they're not studied, yes, but we teach them that you can't start giving your kids processed foods. You have to feed them good whole foods. You have to be aware of the types of diapers that you use and the types of lotions that you use, and
Right.
and maybe following an alternate vaccine schedule, or not vaccinating your child when they've had a fever within the last week or two. All of these little things will make a huge difference. And more so even with kids so you have to make these changes, and like you were just saying, just be more proactive in
Right.
making these changes.
Where do you see the future of autism and the gut health research going in the next decade?
I think the answer to autism lies in the gut, and I think that in the next 10 or 15 years, we're going to see that many kids with autism are lacking some key bacteria, probably some bacteria that we don't even know exists. Because the gut-brain connection and the studies that I'm seeing coming out of Dr. Hazan in Florida, in California, and what they're doing with the microbiome is incredible. And I just think we only know the tip of the iceberg of the microbiome.
Right.
We don't know about beneficial viruses. We don't know about beneficial parasites. We don't know that much about beneficial yeast. So I think the key is going to be treating the gut, and because the gut is also the hub for detoxification, so that's the other thing. Is the last thing I'll say on that is, don't rush to detoxify your kids from heavy metals. The first step in any good autism recovery program or functional medicine program is you have to get the gut at least functioning well before you can move on to all the other things, because it's where everything happens. It's where you're bringing in all your nutrients, and those nutrients control the biochemical processes in your body. So you have to start. You can't detoxify a child that still has a sick gut, because you'll never get anywhere. You'll just be chasing your tail. So,
Yeah.
but I really do think that there's promise with ivermectin and other like therapies that, and it's not ivermectin as a parasite treatment. It's not ivermectin seems to increase this bacteria called bifidobacter that's very crucial and very crucially low in lots of kids with autism. And I think we're going to see more of that in the pipeline as we learn more about it. So I think that's the future of fixing autism, is going to be getting these children in general, to have healthy guts.
Beautiful. And so how do parents get in touch with you if they're interested in just beginning the process of the assessment?
So the best way is our website, InnerU, with the letter U, health.com. We do have a whole section there on autism. You could reach out to us. We do offer what we call a free roadmap consultation. So one of the things that has been our mission with functional medicine is that we're trying to make functional medicine more affordable for parents, because we don't believe that these treatments should just be available to children of higher socioeconomic backgrounds. So one of the other things we're looking to is we're working with some charitable organizations as well, that if a family can afford some of the testing or some of the, the therapies, that maybe we can start to sponsor children, maybe some
Beautiful.
people. So fundraising, that's the next thing in our pipeline. But our prices are a fraction of what most functional doctors charge. And again, we offer a free, what we call our roadmap to health. We feel that the first consult, unless, we're really reliant on testing, so that the first consult is kind of just to get to know the child and the family and really come up with a strategy for testing and a plan of action. And so then after that, then we, we'll dive deeper. But so we do, if you'd like to see if this is maybe something that you're interested in for your child or your family, we work with the family as a whole unit. You can't have your autistic child eating something and then the rest of the family eating something else. This has to be a family thing. So we work with the entire family. So reach out to us on our website.
Beautiful.
We'll ask about our roadmap consultation, and we're dying to help as many children as possible. That's our mission, to help as many children with autism as possible, and adults. We
of course,
as well.
I was going to say this information is definitely good for adults as well.
Yes, exactly.
And I know, you do a lot of education around this. So I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. And I hope my audience really took some notes. And I know, hopefully they'll give you a call and take the first step, right? Because the first step is making that phone call.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rich.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really a great experience. I appreciate your knowledge and the insightful questions that you asked were great. And I hope that to see you again very soon.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm your host, Giovanna Tardarone. Until next week. See you then. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me on Sparking Change with Gigi. I hope that our episode today has ignited a spark within you to create positive change in your own life and in the world around you. To learn more about how you can become a guest or supporter, head over to sparkingchangenow.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, sharing, and leaving a review. Your feedback is incredibly valuable to me, and it helps me to continue producing content that sparks change in each of us and the world. You can find us on various platforms, including Google Play Store, Apple App Store, YouTube, Facebook, Roku, Android TV, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire. Thank you again for watching, and I look forward to having you join me again next week on Sparking Change with Gigi.